Coming up on This Week in Plymouth, new job postings from the town, residents express their concerns with the tax rate, and we sit down with town manager Scott Whedon. All that and more coming up on This Week in Plymouth. Hello and welcome to this Tuesday, January 30th edition of This Week in Plymouth. I'm your host, Dan Salzer. The Plymouth Select Board met this past week where they held the first public hearing for the 24-25 town budget. There was a large turnout for the meeting from residents concerned with the revaluations on their properties after the recent assessment.
My value went up 72%. So from the past 5 years, it was 108,300. It jumped to 240,700, and that's for everybody in my building.
I still haven't gotten a call back or a reply since September about my appraisal.
I had a piece of property that's sitting on the river, was just underwater here a couple weeks ago, doubled in price.
With all the confusion around the tax rate and how it's being set in the revaluation process, we welcome Town Manager Scott Whedon to the program. Scott, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Dan. I think it's a very important session that we're able to dispel rumors. We're able to communicate openly, honest, and create transparent information.
Looking at things, what are some of the items that you, the Budget Committee, the Select Board have been working on with the town departments over the last year for this upcoming budget?
Great question. First, I think I firmly believe that we need to have a balanced budget in the town of Plymouth that the taxpayers can support. This means meeting expectations and creating sustainability for the town. Last year at town meeting, March of 2023, we took away a number of items that the body at town meeting asked us to look at. And some of those were creating select board strategic priorities. Those have been created. They're published on the town website. And I'm always willing to answer any questions with regards to those. The other thing was really taking a look at tax-exempt nonprofit properties and making sure they're in compliance with RSA 501c3, which are the requirements to maintain a nonprofit tax-exempt status. I can tell you over the summer, our assessors, our consultants through Whitney Consultants went out and they visited every nonprofit tax-exempt property to assure that they met the status and to create a site visit to look at the properties to assure that any properties that weren't currently on the tax roll would be placed on the tax roll. We did pick up a few properties over the summer, which will be added in April to the taxable property list. Another thing is the capital improvement program. We were asked to look at a capital improvement program 2 years ago to create sustainability in major purchases dealing with infrastructure, equipment, land, and buildings. We have done that this year in the current budget, the 23-24 budget. There were expenditures out of the CIP plan for that purpose, and the plan runs out until 2029. And the reason we do that is to really create sustainability so we don't see the valleys and the hikes in that type of purchasing, is that we're stabilizing the purchasing over a 6 to 8 year period. We were asked to look at grant research and acceptance of funds from grants. We've done that, and the departments have been very successful in supplementing grant funds in lieu of budget expenditures. So we've done that a little bit. The big thing was our ambulance service budget. And we never appropriately budgeted for an ambulance service business. So this year I worked with the fire department, Chief Morrison, Deputy Chief Pierce, in developing an operating budget that truly reflects the cost associated with running an ambulance business. Most people probably know we contract with Ashland, Holderness, Rumney, and Bridgewater. And we're able to create that operating budget. We know what it costs the town of Plymouth to run an ambulance to a town per call. We know how many calls that we run to each one of those towns, and those calls were put into percentage of that total budget. So we've done that this year and have issued the contracts to the towns, which I'm sure they're looking at and understanding. But my feeling and my moving forward on this is that if you are a taxpayer in the town of Plymouth, you should not be paying for someone to be transported from one of our contracted towns. The other piece to this that many people probably don't understand is how the billing is done and the receipt of the revenues that we receive. When I say that is that medical repricing occurs both in the commercial insurance industry as well as in Medicaid and Medicomp. What that means, if we submit a bill for, let's use a figure of $1,000, we know that that's going to be repriced and we may get 40% of that revenue back to the town. It's allowed through federal regulations, state regulations, so you can see there's quite a bit of money lost when we're billing and paying a billing agency to do that for us. But that was probably one of the most important and crucial parts of redeveloping a budget moving into 24-25.
Looking at the budget a little bit more in depth, people might assume that it's copy paste from the previous years. Oh, I want to get a couple of new things into my budget line for equipment, for whatever. Talk us through the budget process. It's really a year-long process.
It is a year-long process. This budget for 24-25, which will go in front of the residents, taxpayers in Plymouth on March 13th of 2024, is town meeting night. The budgetary process is probably the largest policy document that the town of Plymouth develops. It takes a considerable amount of time to develop this document because, as Dan stated, it's not a document that we just copy and paste and add a percentage into that based on inflation, so to speak. We start with meeting with each individual department head and talking through their existing budget and what they're looking for in the upcoming budget. We look at the what's, the wants, the needs, and justifications for those budget lines. And like I said, we, myself, the finance director, the budget committee, the select board, and the department heads worked diligently on this budget from July through our first public budget hearing, which was held on Monday, January 22nd. So there's a considerable amount of data that goes through this process and is vetted to make sure these are the needs that fit the community's expectations on the services that are asked for.
At the budget, people might not realize it's broken into 4 different categories, but let's take a look at the budget a little bit more in depth and what is it looking like on the town side going into 24-25?
That's a very good point, Dan, is that the budget is broken, the tax rate is broken into 4 pieces. So when someone receives their tax bill, they see the town portion, they see the local education portion, they see the state education, and they see the county. So 4 pieces of that tax rate. And we know after the reevaluation took place this past summer, and the tax rate was set by the Department of Revenue Administration based on our audited numbers that were done back in October, passed on to the Department of Revenue Administration, and they calculate all those numbers based on expenditures, the budget appropriations, the revenues, the encumbrances, all the different pieces that we report over to the Department of Revenue Administration. And that information is put into a database, and they provide us with a tax rate. We know that tax rate dropped to $24.38. What does that mean for the town of Plymouth looking into the 24-25 budget? I can tell you sitting here today that when we go to town meeting in March 13th of 2024, the budget that is going to go in front of the taxpayers, the body that's there, is $12,758,000. And that is inclusive of all the warrant articles, all the operating costs, and all the capital expenditures. With that being said, it is $2.2 million less than the budget that was appropriated last year of $15,032,000. So what does that result? What does that mean? That means we have worked hard and diligently to reduce the overall budget by 15%. And you may ask, what does that do to the tax rate? What that does is the potential tax rate decrease is $1.24. That would reduce the town portion of the tax rate from $11.09 down to $9.85 per $1,000 in valuation. This is if revenues that are estimated come true. And we don't estimate the revenues high, we estimate the revenues moderately, and we have hit the mark on each of the last 2 years.
So how are you calculating that revenue in income essentially to the town? What's it look like? What are you taking into factors?
We take in all the revenue. The factors we look at is all the revenues that the departments generate, which if you get a copy of the budget, you'll see those revenues that are associated with each department at the lead portion of that budget line. So you can see the revenues that are anticipated. We're anticipating about $4.5 million in revenues over the course of the year. And if we receive that as estimated, you would reduce the $12,758,000 by that much to raise approximately just over $7 million through taxation to support the budgets of the operating budgets of the town.
What are some of the highlights for this year's budget that people need to be aware of? I mean, every department has its wants and needs, but what are some things that people should really be paying attention to in this year's budget?
So you'll see several warrant articles, and our second public budget hearing will be on February 8th at 5 p.m. at Town Hall. Obviously, it is broadcast through Penny Baker TV, as well as available through the Zoom link, and we always welcome people to attend in person at the meeting. At that meeting, we will read through the warrant articles, which are being finalized now with the Department of Revenue Administration, because we have to have final approval through DRA in order to present the warrant articles to the Select Board. So things that we're looking at this year that I call highlights of the 24-25 budget is salary adjustments based on market and retention, 3% increases for employees, 1.5% increases for fire department employees and adjustments, and this is all through the union negotiated contract. We're asking for a new firefighter for the fire department. We saw a decrease in health insurance. And some may ask, how did you see a decrease in health insurance? It's because we effectively looked at our company that we deal with, Health Trust, who insures towns, cities, schools, and counties throughout the state. And we put in a couple additional medical plans that were cost-effective medical plans that allowed us to save some substantial money over the last year. We'll look to do another cost-effective medical plan this year, which shifts a little bit of the cost on the medical plan portion to the employee versus to the town. But with this all being said, we should be able to maintain and sustain the rate we're at now for health insurance. We did see increases in our property casualty, in our workers' compensation insurances, and again, overall inflation for services, equipment, and purchases. But with that said, we were able to go through the budgets and create a savings based on meeting with the departments and articulating their needs throughout the entire process.
Let's go back and look at the nonprofits. You mentioned that the town and the consulting group went through every nonprofit here in the town of Plymouth to look at the revaluation and what might be going on in that. Talk us through that process a little bit more so people will understand or can understand how the determination is if it's still a nonprofit or what portion is nonprofit and what might go back on the tax rate.
Sure, great question. So what we did is our assessing company, Whitney Consultants, and I sat down for a considerable amount of time going into the summer. And we looked at all of the nonprofit tax-exempt properties that are registered in the town of Plymouth. And based on that, our consultants went out and visited with each one of those nonprofit tax-exempt properties. When I say met with them, it's a site visit to view the property, but also a requirement for them to provide all their financial documentation and information that is submitted to the Secretary of State to get the approval of a nonprofit tax-exempt property under the RSA 501c3. So once the assessors were able to gather that information and do the site visits the determinations were made if they truly met that requirement of being tax exempt or nonprofit, or was there portions of their buildings that were taxable because they had for-profit organizations residing within them. That was the process that took place. The other piece of it, I think, in all fairness, is to say we do and we have entered into 6 pilot agreements with nonprofits in Plymouth, and they have continued to value the relationship and pay the pilot agreement, payment in lieu of taxes, to the town over the course of 2023, moving into 2024.
Looking at equipment going ahead in the future for the budgets and down the road, the 5-10-year lookout, some of the warrant articles that potentially will be going before the town this year in March are the ability to get equipment, fire trucks, ambulances, police vehicles. What does that mean in the warrant articles? Does that mean that initial payment is going to be in this year's budget, or how is that going to be calculated so people can understand a little bit better if those come up?
Great question. We have 4 warrant articles that are looking to purchase new equipment. There's an ambulance, there's a highway dump truck, there is a highway sweeper, and there is a new fire engine. Knowing that these pieces of equipment are aged and were built into the capital improvement program to purchase them in 24-25. What we're hearing from the manufacturers is that there's a leeway of 24 to 36 months before we can receive this equipment. So our thought is, why would we want to raise and appropriate monies in this year's budget if we're not going to be able to get the equipment this year? So what we would be doing is asking for authorization for the Board of Selectmen to enter into a long-term lease with an escape clause in the event that the year that this comes in front of the board, so let's say 36 months from now, we're going to take delivery of a new piece of fire apparatus, and that first payment's going to be due, that's when it would be placed on the warrant for the payment of that long-term lease. So like I said, we have 4 of those warrant articles that will be going forth on this year's warrant, and will be discussed on Thursday, February 8th at the second public budget hearing.
In the terms of the town, police and fire have always been in need in the last decade of new facilities. I know there's a needs assessment committee in place and has been going on for over a year, but tell the people or talk to the people a little bit more about how that process has gone, what it's looking like going forward.
So what we've done over the course of the last year is the select board developed a committee to look into a new police fire facility. And maybe not just police fire facility, but maybe a community room included in this building. So we've looked at what maybe our building needs are. We've had a company, we're working with the Turner Group, an engineering firm, to tell us how are our buildings right now? How is our building at 42 Highland Street, where the fire department is located? And how is our building on North Main Street, Route 3, the police department? How is that? So we've done sustainability studies on those, we've done need assessments on those buildings, and have a great idea on what it would cost to renovate those buildings and make them viable for the needs of police and fire in today's society. What we're asking is to move forward. There is a warrant article, or actually there's a capital expenditure for a further study of a police fire facility. We need to find a piece of land. We need to do the studies on that piece of land from an environmental, wetlands, and we don't have that piece of land in sight right now, but we want to be able to fund that in the event that a piece of land comes available, that we would then bring back to the taxpayers in next year's warrant. But right now, it's a study committee. We're truly meeting with the fire department, with the police department, with the engineering group, as well as with the committee to be able to map out a plan that we're able to bring to town meeting over the next couple of years.
I've got thousands of other questions now that we have you in their studio, but we'll wrap up with in a more of a positive note or a positive outlook, what are your plans here for the town, say over the next 5 years? Why should people be excited to continue to invest in the town of Plymouth going forward?
I think from a logistical perspective and operational is that I live in the community, I pay taxes in the community, I own property in the community, and I'm vested to the town of Plymouth. And I, as much as all of you, want to see sustainability for the town of Plymouth. And I can assure you that we will do that each and every year through the budgetary process. The other thing I want to mention that I think is very important is the reevaluation of property. I think it's important that we look at how we reevaluate property in the town of Plymouth. And the reason for that is everybody has to realize that 52% of the property in the town of Plymouth is owned by tax exempt or nonprofit. That means that 47%, 48% of us are paying that tax bill. When I say 48%, that's 1,800 taxpayers are paying that cost associated with the budget. My thoughts and plans after conversations with the Board of Selectmen is meeting with our assessing company, meeting with the Department of Revenue Administration, in that keeping in mind that reevaluations have to, by law, be done at a minimum of every 5 years. For a town situated like Plymouth with such a heavy populated nonprofit tax exempt, it would be better for the town of Plymouth to do a reevaluation more frequently. So we didn't see the boom in the real estate industry that we saw in this last reevaluation. That if we do it every other year and do a full update, we'll see gradual increases or gradual declines. And I think we'll see a market decline over the next couple of years. Not a lot, but every little bit helps. So my goal is to create a reevaluation process that that sustains the affordability of living in the town of Plymouth, but also that it reevaluates a full market update every other year. And I think that's important for the town to look at that and understand the effects that reevaluation has on property. And I think a lot of us realize that this year.
Again, you can visit the town website and click on the top bar for the budget information to see all the details on the 2024-2025 budget. And if you have any questions, Scott, how can people reach out?
My door is always open. I can tell you that I take visitors every single day. If you leave me a message, I assure you I will return that same day. And you can send me an email at townmanager@plymouthnh.gov. I will always answer your questions, concerns, and comments.
Again, we encourage you to attend the second public hearing for the budget on Thursday, February 8th, and also please attend town meeting in March on the 13th that night. Vote on everything, also on voting day on the 12th all day long. Scott, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Dan.
The following night, the Water and Sewer Commissioners met. The board hosted David Fox from Raftelis that night, who gave a presentation on the recommended rate changes based on the recent rate study the board conducted.
I'd like to turn over the presentation to David Fox of Raftelis, who we're very grateful to have had as a consultant on this project of ours.
So I'll talk first about just the across-the-board rate increases. We're not recommending any additional revenue increase in 2024 on the water side, but then approximately 5% thereafter. This does also assume that you're going to start charging for private fire protection. I'll jump over to the sewer. Very similar talking points here, so I won't go into too much detail, but sewer fund overview, revenue requirements or the costs are projected to increase by about 28% from 2023 to 2024. A 6.4% increase kind of annually thereafter from 25 to 29. What we are recommending is that the fixed charges should be scaled based on meter size, which you can see bolded on the far right portion of this chart, is that the fixed charges will start to increase as the meter size gets larger.
Thank you, Dave, once again for helping us. It's been a couple of years now, and we're appreciative that this is wrapped up and we all feel comfortable and good about where we're going with both a short-term and a long-term plan.
Please keep in mind that these rates are subject to change and are not final until the annual meeting on the 14th of March. The town results for the New Hampshire primary election are now available to view on the town website. Just head over to plymouthnh.gov to see the results. The town of Plymouth has multiple openings for full-time staff. To see the full list of openings, please visit the town website and click on Employment. For the first time in years, the Recreation Department is pleased to offer you swim lessons starting in early March. Registration for Plymouth residents began yesterday and will continue through February 15th, so be sure to grab a spot today before it's filled. Pease Public Library has a knitting club that began earlier this month. The club meets every Thursday from either 10 to 11 a.m. or 3:30 to 4:30 p.m. alternating weeks. Other yarn crafters are welcome to attend the meetings. It's now time to dive into Bobcat sports. The wrestling team continues its strong season. The Bobcats have two big events scheduled for this week. First is a tri-duel at Kingswood Regional with John Stark tomorrow afternoon. And on Saturday, it's the annual Plymouth Tournament, one of the largest tournaments in the regular season that will see teams from all over the regions, from Vermont, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts. PBTV will have live coverage of the entire meet starting at 9 a.m. on our YouTube channel, and we'll have coverage of the finals live on channel 1302 later in the afternoon. After last week's postponement due to weather, the 5-4-1 Kearsarge Plymouth Cats hockey team will be back in action on Wednesday, January 31st, as they host Hollis Brookline Dairy Field. Puck drop is set for 4 p.m. from the PSU Ice Arena. We'll have full coverage right here on PBTV. Girls basketball will look to stop a 2-game skid entering this week's action. The Bobcats battled Bishop Brady on the road last night and will travel to Kennett this evening before returning home on Thursday to host Hanover. Watch the Bobcats against the Bears on Thursday night live on PBTV. The boys basketball team looks to stop a 4-game losing streak this week. The Bobcats hosted Bishop Brady last night before taking on Kennett tonight at home. The team will wrap up the week with a trip to Hanover on Friday evening. The team will have one more home game after this week on February 13th. Taking a look at this week's meeting schedule, PERLAC will be meeting tonight at 6:30, and the Planning Board will be meeting on Thursday, February 1st at 6:30 p.m. in the meeting room at Town Hall. The board looks to conclude the zoning amendments hearings. This will be the third one as they try to push all 8 through to town voting. If you have any news stories you think we should cover, or if you'd like to create your own show, contact us at the station with the information on your screen. For all of us here at Pemmy Baker TV, thank you so much for joining us. For our executive producer, Jonathan Picard, I'm Dan Salzer. Join us again for another episode of This Week in Plymouth right here on PBTV.